Thorn and bone. Of sword and shield. 5 Imperial armies are in Sarengrave this season. The Black Thorns, Boyar's Hasta and Granite Pillar stand ready to face the Valorn as it comes pouring out of Bendol into the Nezustak forest. The Citadel Guard and the Golden Axe focus their efforts on the remaining threat of the Druge, whose desperation becomes more and more pronounced as each season passes. There is also the Axos army of Ipotavo, but they are concerned with claiming the Thornfen and protecting it from any errant Valorn spawn. Likewise, the limited military forces of the Nezustak rebels, the warriors of the Marsh Striders and the Bloodwater Spears and the other former slaves of the Malum, are focused entirely on protecting their homes from the Valorn, fighting alongside the Empire's armies. Also fighting with the Imperial Army's warbands, led by Imperial captains, easily another 2 whole armies worth of heroes and champions. Most fight alongside the Black Thorns, with a healthy contingent standing with the Boyar's Hasta, but there are warriors from across the Empire fighting in Sarengrave this season, and every army has its supporters. There is also something in the air. Autumn magic floods the territory, bringing with it an intuitive sense of the presence of danger that allows folk to avoid nearby enemies and hazards. Those affected by this power find themselves drawn by chance to safe locations and possessed of an uncanny awareness of the paths to take to help them avoid capture or death. While its usefulness to those fighting the Valorn is obvious, it also provides a measure of protection to the armies fighting in Sarengrave this season. The Doom of Beantal Dol. The last act of the Tainted Basilisk was to rouse the Valorn of Beantal Dol to devour Sarengrave, just as they raised the Valorn of Tharanind to lay waste to Theranin. Using the Sentinel Gate, Imperial heroes managed to stem the tide of the Valorn in Bloodwater Marsh, and in the process shatter the corrupt army of the Tainted Basilisk once and for all. Nothing can save the warding stones that once kept the Valorn contained in Bendol, but thanks in part to the vigilance of the Boyar's Hasta, the worst of the damage has been contained. All except for the Nezustak forest. The Tainted Basilisk directed their malice against the forest and the marshes, against the rebels and the Empire. Even as heroes are fighting in the Bloodwater Marsh, the Valorn is beginning to surge forth across the woodlands claimed by the former slaves of the Sarengrave Druge. Almost since the moment it was first unleashed, since it brought about the ruin of Beantal Dol, the Valorn in Bendol has been contained. That last desperate act of the Terunial magicians meant that 1,000 years of growth, of the fecund magic of the Spring Realm pouring into the mortal world, had nowhere to go. The warnings were plentiful. If the warding stones were removed, the Valorn would explode outwards like a mechanism under tension that has finally been released. And explode it does. An eruption of greenery that spreads in all directions. It is weakened in Turan Flats, in Thornfen and in Whisperwood. It has been held back in Bloodwater Marsh. Now it seeks to overwhelm Nezustak and the people who live there. A terrible tendril of destruction whipping out from the dark heart of Bendol. The people of Nezustak Forest will fight, but they stand no chance against the unleashed Valorn. Even the aid of the Prince with 1,000 foes won't be enough to save them. The heralds and mortal friends of the Spring Eternal will do their best, but this is not a corrupt overseer, a tyrant, an oppressive conqueror they can face down. Nor is it a force they can rally the oppressed to rise up against. It is a force of nature, utterly wild and completely savage, incapable of fear, remorse, or pity. A sea of life that will consume everything in its path, transforming everything over which it washes into part of itself. So it falls to the Imperial armies to face the Valorn of Bendol, to stand against the tide, to turn back the sea. There are degrees of victory, of course, but Anything short of total triumph will see Nezustak Forest tainted, wounded by the Valorn in a way that cannot be healed until that day where mortals finally face the wrath of the Valorn united and achieve its destruction. Just as with East Ashes, where the Pilgrims' Defiance fought bravely against Tharanind, if any part of the Valorn makes it through the Defenders, the land will be infested with the power of chaos. A tall order. All three armies are enchanted with the clarity of the master strategist. This is not a struggle to kill the opponent. Right now there is no way to kill the Valorn in any way that matters, but to face its wrath and endure it. In the wild woods of Nezustak, the preternatural strategic awareness granted by day magic will prove invaluable, allowing for soldiers spread across the region to coordinate their efforts toward the shared goal. The Black Thorns take the lead, appropriately enough, forming the first line of defence against the horror boiling out of Bendol. The Granite Pillar see to the defence of the septs of the Malum, to those newly established settlements across Nezustak that house those who broke free of Druj dominance. The Boyars Hasta stand between the two, ready to turn their spears to the defence of the former slaves, or to plunge them into the heart of the Valorn spawn, whichever is most needed. The rebels of Nezustak are not defenceless. All those who can fight prepare to do so. The heralds of Unshackled are everywhere, offering counsel and support. There is no hiding from the Valorn. It devours all hiding places. There is no yielding. It is incapable of mercy. There is only flight or fight. Those who cannot fight flee westward under the protection of Highguard. Those who can fight take up spear and bow and ready themselves to battle the end of the world alongside Imperial soldiers. There is some suspicion, of course, but the example of the Griffin's pride and the clear commitment of the Empire to defend them mean that it is put, for the moment at least, aside. Even the children of the Ward of the Young urge the people of Nezustak to take the aid of Imperial armies at face value, at least for now. There may be a time when the septs of the Malum and the Empire must fight one another, but for now they are united in a single cause. There is barely enough time to prepare, though, before the first tendrils of the Valorn stretch out from the heart of Sarangrave into the forest, and chaos flows in their wake. Terror of 1,000 years. The Valorn rises, writhing out across Nezustak Forest. The first sign of its coming is that the vegetation all along the river begins to thicken, to grow with supernatural speed and fecundity, forcing the waters that flow down toward the lake to slow to a snail's pace. Across this surface sprout the roots of the Bendol trees, the body of the Valorn itself, creating a bridge across which the creatures of the deep woods can pour unchecked into Nezustak. And an observer might see this and shudder as to what this same process might have done in Bloodwater Marsh, had it been free to spread there as well. There is a mercy. The Valorn is expanding so swiftly that the miasma that hangs heavy over the places it claims is left behind. Not so the Valorn spawn, the aberrant creatures that dwell within the heart of darkness, trapped in an eternal cycle of life and death, hunting and hunted in turn, warped by exposure to the chaos of spring, compounded by the folly of Taruniel. It would take too long to enumerate the abhorrent things that pour out of Bendol. There are the Valorn spawn husks, of course. Although it is rare to encounter them outside the mists of the miasma, this season at least, they are on the move into Nezustak. Perhaps it is a consequence of the great tide of power flowing out of the Valorn that drives them before it, heralds of its coming. The first husks are perhaps the most tragic. They are former human folk, many with the Briar lineage. Most look so fresh they might be mistaken for living beings were it not for the way they move. These are the Grinboar, that sept of human slaves that lived on the very edge of the Nezustak forest across the river from the Valorn. The children of Irahara grimly recount their attempt to get them to flee the advance of the Valorn, and how they refused to leave. As Beantal Dol began to rise, they bedecked themselves in their finery, adorned themselves in flowers, and crossed the river en masse to join with their ancestors. The heralds were barely able to save a handful of children from this madness. For the rest, they really did join their ancestors, as creatures of the Valorn caught perpetually between life and death. Unfortunately, a disproportionate number of the former Grinbor seem to have made particularly strong hosts, even those without Briar lineage. Many of them exhibit the powers of the so-called Dryads, husks that channel spring magic directly to empower and support the other husks around them, and can by themselves keep a mob moving forward even in the face of concerted resistance. There are also orc bodies moving at the forefront of the husks, but they are significantly less tragic. Many are magicians of the tainted basilisk, those overwhelmed by the Valorn when they broke the warding stones. Their living death has washed away their magic, their spite and bitterness, leaving them no more potent than any other Valorn spawn. Some do still wear remnants of the mage armour that protected them in life, and some magic still clings to it, but it is fading fast. The tainted basilisk have reaped their reward for their wickedness, and paid the price for their attempt at retribution. The husks are only part of it, though, and alongside them come all the twisted abominations of the Valorn. The scouts who pressed into the depths of the Valorn spoke of monstrous hunting lizards whose jaws split open like flowers, revealing hundreds of hooked teeth, and of serpentine creatures with spider-like legs that skittered through the trees, leaping at their prey and tearing them apart with their barbed claws before swallowing them whole. These are but the tip of the iceberg, however. Bear-like horrors with living vines growing in their hide that snap out and entangle enemies. Trees that shamble and stumble, shrieking with human voices and gushing red blood rather than sap when they are injured. Orbs of plant matter that drift unnaturally against the wind and explode with venomous spores when they take the slightest damage. Awful humanoid things, part flesh and part plant, each one twice the size of orc or human, lumpen and misshapen as the half-sculpted mockery of thinking beings that they are. There is at least one sighting of an infested marsh-walker, a natural creature twisted into a being of rampant destruction that moans and howls in constant agony. A creature that looks like nothing so much as a great ball of humanoid arms, rolling and dragging itself through the trees before opening dozens of dripping maws in the palms of its hands, with which it can suck all the blood from an unfortunate victim in a matter of moments. This and more, creatures from nightmare, all driven forward by the instinct of the Valorn to devour, to consume, to contain. Of all the spawn of the Valorn, only the Ettercaps are absent. As the scouts revealed, there seemed to be none in Bendol. If there is a reason for this conspicuous absence, it is not any more apparent than it was when the Navarre first slipped into the ruins of Beantal Dol. They come, and the Empire holds against them, and then things begin to go wrong. The Wooden Fastness. Shortly after the spring equinox, a magical ward settles over the Nezustak forest. The Wooden Fastness, forged from the power of Irahara himself. Thickets of thorn and briar form, masses of branch and root mesh together to create veritable walls of living vegetation to help hold back the surging Valorn. The marsh forest itself acts to hinder enemies, while parting to allow the swift passage of allies. Even some of the beasts of Nezustak themselves fight the Valorn, in keeping with their natures, although this rarely ends well for them. and while the region belongs to the rebels, the magic treats the Imperial defenders as allies and offers them safety in the wild places of the woodlands. At the same time, the servants of Irahara slip into the woodlands in numbers hitherto unseen. Their primary focus is to protect the rebels, but they are prepared to cooperate with the Empire toward their shared goal. Bright-eyed heralds appear from nowhere to warn a cohort of the granite pillar of the approach of Valorn spawn that might otherwise have caught them in a pincer. Quick, rabbit-like creatures the size of a Great Dane lead a lost patrol of the Boyars Hasta to safety at a rebel village, echoing the stories of magical beasts familiar to all Varushkans. It is just as well, perhaps, that it is this army that is in Sarengrave, for Irahara has little love for certain other Varushkan armies. The whispered words of the Golden Hare himself are brought on the wind to the Black Thorns, offering guidance as to where their strength might be best employed. The friends of Irahara, the mortals who aid the Eternal and have come to Nezustak to work with the rebels, say that in part this response from the Eternal is due to the petition of the Archmage of Spring, who has entreated Shacklebreaker for aid in Nezustak. The aid is for the most part subtle, but it is aid nonetheless. Many who would have died survive their encounters with the Valorn, and those who might have been overwhelmed are brought succour when it is most needful. However, this very ward that protects so many proves to be a two-edged sword. The Valorn is drawn to spring magic, and the wooden fastness is a powerful expression of that realm's arts. At first, the ward is only beneficial, helping the defenders hold back the Valorn. Unfortunately, the further the Valorn spawn press, the deeper its tendrils penetrate, the wilder they become. The mechanism is unclear, but they glut themselves somehow on the magic flowing around them. The Valorn itself seems to batten on to the magic, feeding on it, drawing strength from it. The husks drive forward, pressing further ahead of the tendrils of the Valorn itself. The abominations often seem driven into a frenzy when they come into contact with elements of the ward, attacking with berserk fury. Worse, the power of the ward serves to invigorate and revitalise the Valorn spawn. Where the ward is most potent, they seem to heal almost immediately from all save the most terrible wounds. While they cannot endure venom, the Valorn spawn husks seem almost impossible to destroy except by literally rending them limb from limb. While the ward slows the attackers, while it protects the weak and the strong, it does so by making the Valorn spawn more vicious, and blood begins to flow in rivers through the forests of Nezustak. It is, of course, at this exact moment that the Druj choose to return to Sarengrave. Fang and Feather. The Tainted Basilisk are no more, but there are two other armies that still call Sarengrave home. The Poison Crane are the warriors of the Marsh Lizard who once dominated Thornfen and Kroll. Likewise, the Hidden Snake are drawn from the Banded Snake Sept who ruled over Nezustak Forest and the Turan Flats. Their homelands have been conquered by the Empire. Those Druj who ruled the Sept have been forced to flee, either north into the salt flats of Sanath, or into the wild places of Sarengrave. Either way, they are in no position to support their warriors anymore. It comes as no surprise, then, that a couple of weeks after the spring equinox, these two armies launch an attack against Sarengrave. It is perhaps more of a surprise that there are no other Druj armies with them. They do not come alone, however, when they pour across the border from Lower Sarnath into Turan Flats. It is common for Druj armies to bear potent enchantments, but usually they draw on the lore of spring magic. Sometimes, though, it can be easy to forget that the wicked magicians of the Druj are versed in other realms as well. It has been a long time since the Empire has seen the warriors of the Malum fighting alongside the dead, but when the two battered armies come into the Sarengrave, Thousands of shambling horrors come with them. If they were Imperial armies, the unfettered mind would say they are subject to quickening cold meat, but this is not any dubious gift of wise Rangara. It is something altogether worse. The dead, predominantly but not solely orcs, are absolutely consumed with hunger for living blood and meat. The spirits inside them are not quite the same as those drawn by the Imperial enchantment. They are as cunning as they are savage. While they cannot speak, they display the ability to work together in a way winter husks rarely evidence. They move quickly, lean and athirst, hunting ahead of the Druge armies in packs that hurl themselves at any who try to fight and relentlessly chase down anyone who tries to flee like wild dogs. A few seem to be possessed of more potent spirits that unleash occasional howls of terrifying intensity that can drive the strength from a warrior and make them easy prey for the pack. They are similar to the traditional spirits called by Imperial magic in one particular way, however. When they are defeated, when their stolen bodies can no longer house the creature of the winter realm housed within, they move swiftly to find another body and rouse it to wakefulness, ready to enact the same horrible dance of hunt, murder and feasting all over again. As the season draws on, then, there are more former humans among their number than orcs, making them all the more horrible. As well as winter spirits, the hidden snake is accompanied by a cohort of the creatures known as tortured souls. Former Imperial heroes and champions, captured by the Druge and transformed through torment and vile ceremonies into relentless warriors of death who harbour an unending hatred for those they see as having abandoned them. The general of the hidden snake, Het Trakar, is known to have an obsession with creating these things, and it seems he has brought his entire collection with him in this last-ditch, desperate attack. Perhaps they believe that the Empire's attention is focused elsewhere, fighting the Valorn, and they will have the opportunity to claim the Turan Flats. Perhaps they are just desperate. Either way, the two armies erupt across the border, launching an overwhelming assault against what were once the holdings of the banded snakes in Turan. They must be hoping to claim the region before the Empire realises they are there, and seize another season from the jaws of death. Battle of the Flats. Fortunately, the Empire is entirely prepared for the attack from the north. The Citadel Guard and the Golden Axe are already in position to meet the onslaught from the Salt Flats, and when the Hidden Snake and the Poison Crane launch their attack, they break themselves against a solid wall of Imperial soldiers. If it were possible to feel pity for the Druge, now might be the time. Even with winter husks fighting with them, they are outnumbered nearly 3-1 by the Urizen and Varushkan troops. There is no subtlety here, no skirmish and retreat, no traps to lure the unsuspecting into, no opportunities to terrorise the weak. There is only a face-to-face fight between two Druge armies that are on the verge of exhausted collapse, and two fresh, well-rested Imperial armies. Druge desperation is no match for the resolve of those that stand against them. The Snake and the Crane are bent on reaching Turan, but they do not come close. The Battle of Turan Flats takes place miles from Trakar's capital, from the Banded Snake's old centre of power. Indeed, the Druge have barely crossed the border before the Citadel Guard and the Golden Axe are upon them. At first, the armies fall back a little, giving the impression, perhaps, that they are overwhelmed and ready to give ground. But they are merely testing the forces that have come against them, wisely waiting to see if this is just the advance guard, and if a more potent force follows behind. As soon as it becomes clear that the two armies are by themselves, the trap snaps shut around them. Thrusting forward towards Turan, means that they are far enough from the border for the plentiful forces of the Golden Axe to flank them on either side, while the Citadel Guard plant their standards in the soft marsh soil and simply refuse to fall back any further. The fighting is vicious, bloody, savage, as only a war against the Druge can be. Stripped of their tricks, they have only their martial force to rely on, and even with their unliving auxiliaries, it is just not enough. No, the Empire does not emerge unscathed. Some 500 Imperial soldiers fall to the Druge, to their howling winter war dogs, to the tortured spirits of champions taken by the enemy and twisted into something unspeakable. At the same time, however, the Druge lose nearly twice that many of their own troops, losses they cannot hope to recover from while the Empire holds Sarengrave, and their septs are broken and scattered. The Druge have been driven back, but the encounter is far from decisive. The invaders are left with no option but to fall back to the Salt Flats, perhaps to make one last attempt on reclaiming their lands next season. The Citadel Guard and the Golden Axe give chase, but they are unable to catch the fleeing Druge. The same Imperial magic that serves to help the folk of Nezustak Forest escape the Valorn proves an unexpected ally to the Orcs of the Malum. The bulk of their two armies easily escape their pursuers, back toward the border with Sanath. An end to waiting. While the Citadel Guard and the Golden Axe battle the Druge in Turan Flats, the rest of the Imperial forces fight alongside the Nezustak rebels against a seemingly endless tide of Valorn spawn, empowered and invigorated by that same spring magic meant to protect the people of the forest. It is a paradox, almost. Those sites where the enchantment is focused are the best place to hold the Valorn, but the savagery of the spawn means it is also where the most blood is spilled. As the Valorn draws power from spring magic, the defenders are thrown into disarray, and it seems clear the Valorn spawn are going to overwhelm them. First one step back, then another. The trees of eastern Nezustak begin to twist as the tendrils of the Valorn begin to take root, begin to plant the seeds that will begin the final infestation of the forest. A desperate council of war is held. Perhaps it is time to accept the inevitable, to save what can be saved, and to abandon the rest. The sorrow that hangs over that discussion is palpable. The heralds of Irahara prepare to help those rebels and Imperials prepared to flee the woodlands to make their escape, if they think the day is lost. In the end, though, the Blackthorns refuse point blank to accept defeat. "Let us show the Empire why we are the first line of defence against this foe," said the general, and those words resonate like never before. Whatever the other Imperial forces may do, the Blackthorns will not retreat before the Valorn. In the face of such commitment, the Granite Pillar and the Boyars Hasta will not abandon their allies. The rebels of the Nezustak Forest will not abandon their homes while there is any chance of holding even a portion of the woodlands. From there, the push-back begins in earnest. The price is grim indeed. The Valorn spawn attack in a frenzy, but the Imperial forces will not allow them to claim any more land here. They lost Eastring to the malice of the tainted basilisk. The Navarre will not allow the Nezustak Forest to share that fate. The Valorn spawn are not just held, but they are forced back toward the river over which they swarmed, back to the ruins of Bayantal Dol. It is slow going at first and gets harder the closer the Valorn spawn get to being driven out of the woodlands. By the time the fighting reaches the banks of the river, the magic of the wooden fastness has been so drained the enchantment is beginning to fall apart. Yet it holds long enough to provide a measure of succour to those fighting the Valorn spawn, moments of respite in the terrible fighting that create a space to recover from the violence, to rest, to sleep safely. In the end, as the summer solstice approaches, the last of the Valorn spawn are cut down. Vates and Magisters and Kabbalists, versed in the lore of spring and winter, work quickly to uproot the seeds of the Valorn before they can take root. Without the relentless attacks of the Valorn, it is relatively easy to work the rituals to deal with the contagion left in their wake. While the Valorn still exists, the Nezustak forest will be in danger, but ultimately no more so than North Pines or the Glen of Shadows. Even the vegetative bridge that stretches across the river, that thick mat of plant matter that allowed abominations to pour into the western woods, begins to decay and fall apart as the Valorn of Biantal Dol slips back into uneasy restfulness. An old story. The Valorn rises, and the resolve of humans and orcs drives it back. Inspirational, perhaps. An old story. In the north, in the Turan Flats, another old story is unfolding. The Poison Crane and the Hidden Snake have escaped the wrath of the Golden Axe and the Citadel Guard, seeking to flee back over the border into the salt flats of Sanath, guided by autumn magic. Yet, at the last moment, something goes wrong. Perhaps those who remember the Druge retreat from Holberg all those years ago might have guessed what is coming, but it seems the armies of the Malum have short memories. When they try to leave Turan Flats, the Hidden Snake and the Poison Crane are met with a tempest of arrows. Druge arrows. Warriors from the Witness, the Spires of Rakan, and the Beacon of Iskrid are arrayed along the border, and they will not let the defeated armies cross out of Sarangrave. Those who try are remorselessly cut down. A few might make it across, but without the protection of the autumn magic that has protected them thus far, they will not escape the patrols for long. Left with no choice, the armies turn on the very edge of Turan Flats and prepare to make their final stand. One way or another, this is the end for the Hidden Snake and the Poison Crane. The end for the Banded Snake and Marsh Lizard. The end for Het Traka and his terrible crimes. Some will escape, no doubt, to join the Druge in hiding throughout the Malum. The autumn enchantment will see to that, but their numbers are only a fraction of those warriors who fled the fall of the Tower of the Skink. How dangerous can they be, these last few thousand Druge? But that is not the only danger here, and this is not just the cruelty of the Druge made manifest. The Citadel Guard have made a close enough study of the magic wrapped around the two armies. It portends something bad that is to come. The bonds of winter magic that coil around the Hidden Snake and Poison Crane hold hundreds and hundreds of winter spirits in thrall to the commanders of the army. When those two armies fail, and fail they will, those spirits will be unleashed into the Sarangrave to begin an unliving rampage. Game information. Sarangrave. The Valorn of Bendol has been beaten back from Nezustak Forest. The Forge the Wooden Fastness enchantment both served to protect the region and imperil its defenders. Its strength both served to increase the defence of the Imperial armies and inflict casualties on the Valorn, inasmuch as that is irrelevant with an empowered Valorn, but it still happened. Unfortunately, in line with warnings given about the danger of spring magic and the Valorn spawn who encountered the enchantment were ultimately empowered by it. They did not gain strength to conquer the region, which would have been counterproductive, but instead the number of casualties they inflicted on the defenders was significantly increased. For now, though, the immediate threat of the Valorn is over. It is no longer contained by the warding stones of Teruniel. Their power has been expended protecting the rest of the territory, and it is still a very powerful example of a Valorn, but it is quiescent, at least for the moment. The Druge armies that invaded Turan Flats were defeated by the Urzan and Varushkan armies. They are still in the territory, however, trapped between the salt flats of Sanath, who will not allow them to enter, and the Empire's soldiers. Their strength is greatly depleted, and they are on the verge of collapse. Following the summer solstice, whatever else happens, these two armies will disband. They are hanging on by a thread, partially due to the impact of the autumn magic enchantment laid on the territory. Thorn. Finally, the Aksu forces of Ipotavo have finished claiming the region of Thornfen with the approval of the Senate. The region is now part of Axos. The fortification itself has been assimilated but has no garrison. At the moment, the Aksu forces in Sarangrave are allied to the Empire and Imperial armies can move through the region freely. If that were to change, any Imperial army trying to move through Thornfen would be forced to stop and deal with any Aksu forces stationed there. True to their intent, the Aksu consolidation of Thornfen has seen the existing population there exiled to Kroll and Whisperwood. Only those former slaves of the Malum who can demonstrate a clear connection to the citadels of Axos have been permitted to remain in Thornfen. Further details of the situation in Thornfen will be presented in the diplomatic Winds of Fortune. Escape path. This season, the Sarangrave was under the effect of autumn magic that helped reduce casualties suffered by armies, as well as helping people find the best route to safety. This is an old arcane projection that wouldn't be passed today. Helping people find safety, such as with the Hand of the Domiro, is an entirely appropriate use of autumn magic, but the ability to reduce all casualties on a territory level isn't something we'd allow today. There are, of course, plenty of arcane projections from previous years in the game, and there is no problem with making use of them, but the older an arcane projection is, the more likely it represents some peculiar aberration of magic. The in-character explanation is that the arcane projection represents the result of a conjunction at the time it was created. The ongoing magical chaos caused by the stars supported the ritual, but the effect of the ritual could not be duplicated going forward.